So what we wanted to touch on today is this, because there's a lot of people that ask me this question, and it's about knees over toes. I know, controversial. So what I wanted to talk to Mike about is like, when is knees over toes good? When is it not for that specific client? Because it's not all, we're not going to bucket it all like it's good for everything and everybody. But also why?
Right.
Like, why would we want to go knees over toes, and then why would we not want to go knees over toes?
Okay. I love it.
We're gonna go through some examples, and we're gonna go through some stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
no,
cool.
I love it. Okay. So first of all, like, let common sense dictate things, right? So like, if every time you take your knees over your toes, probably not the best idea for you to start with those activities, right? Now, there are some times it's super valuable, and you've probably seen that person, whether you paid attention to it or not. Have you ever seen that person where like their knees pointing here, their toes pointing here, right?
Basically, like their knees not aligned with their
they're like all twisted, right? Like, even if you're not a biomechanics expert, you know that's probably not an ideal shape. So one of the big things that we want to try and do, if we're trying to get better biomechanics, right? If you train athletes, like let's say train basketball players, right? We both love basketball. You're gonna hit a lunge shot, right? If every time you hit a lunge, your knee's in this position, one, it's not gonna feel good. Two, it increases your potential for injury. So we gotta try and line these bones up, right? Foot, knee, hip, straight line, and then maybe we start to bring the knees over the toes, right? Because this is a position of deceleration. Right? The question is, can they get into it safely and effectively?
Okay, so first it's like, we gotta get the alignment.
Gotta try and get the alignment first.
Then do we start driving that, possibly, knee past those. So, let's look at something real quick. Because a lot of times this will come up, right? Somebody will do a lunge, and they'll do a lunge, and it may be that when they're doing a lunge, it's that back like knee that's hurting and not the front knee, right? And now, in some scenarios, when somebody's knee's hurting, so for example, I'm going here, and we can make it better through rectus femoris stretch, or something in that nature. Now, in that scenario, you know, do you go to somebody, whether it's a split squat, and I'm going, all right, I want you to drive those knees over toes, right? When is it okay to go there, right? And even if they're hurting, do you go there? Because again, there's some, like I would say, rehab exercises, strength exercises, where you can be up against the wall and pushing those knees over toes. And even though the person feels it in a lunge, they may not have pain during that, and actually makes it better. So when do you kind of make those choices?
Dude, this is such a great question. So first off, knee pain when it's the front leg versus knee pain when it's the back leg. Very important to make that distinction, right? Because a lot of times when somebody's back, this is a lack of hip extension, hip internal rotation, right? So what you're gonna find is the person's gonna go into a big anterior pelvic tilt, anterior orientation, right?
So that's basically, that's Instagram, but what I call it. Instagram.
We used to call it J-Lo, right? When J-Lo was the thing, it's J-Lo booty, right? So we have to work on getting the hips underneath them. Now, one of the things we may actually want to do is get them comfortable in this position, right? Try and get these quads to relax and shut off a little bit. So maybe we put them in half kneeling. We do some activities there. We foam roll rec fem. We do those types of things, and maybe that loosens it up, okay? So if somebody's got back leg issues, that's one thing. If they have front leg issues, that's another, okay? Now, one of the big things that I think is super important too, whenever we talk about this, I really, really, really don't like knees over toes without heel contact, okay? Heel contact is reflective of your hips, your hamstrings, being able to distribute that force. So when I go here, you better hope you got some really strong knee joints and the world's strongest soleus, right? That soleus, that little muscle down here in your calves, because your hamstrings, your glutes can't really get involved in this position. So that's why when I set you up for all these activities, we can go knees over toes, but I want you to feel your heels while you're doing it.
So that's where, for example, now I'm going to kind of show you let's say from this side, we're doing a static lunge, split squat lunge. We want to go knees over toes. But if I don't have that range, so now I'm getting here, and then my heel comes off the ground. So that's a no-no. We're not going to do that. And because, but this is the essentially like how we can fix that to a degree. It's like I use the wedge because I can keep my heel down. And now I can drive knees over toes. And still feel that heel. Right. And now things are working the way that they're supposed to be working. As I go there. Now, even for me, here's the deal. So we talked about this at the beginning. When you look at the hips, so if I'm going to exaggerate this into a bad position, right?
Yeah, that's what I do.
So, example, I'm going to go, hey, let's do knees over toes because it's going to strengthen your knee.
Yep.
But my hips all the way out, like I'm exaggerating this one, right? So now, I'm here.
Yep.
So this is like no bueno, because we have to get whatever we got to do to have alignment in the hips, be able to feel the heel. So the rule ends up being like, we can start working that if we have hip alignment. And then what is too much, right? So if somebody hasn't been going knees over toes, well, what would you say is a big no-no where it's like, okay, now we did it so much that we're going to have some issues, whether it's excessive soreness, inflammation, whatever it may be.
So I think what I see is sometimes somebody gets excited about like something new, right? Like, oh, I'm going to start running. And so what do? They go run like 20 miles the first week. Now, oh, I got shin splints, right? So trying to jump right into doing these activities a whole bunch, right? Without giving your body some time for adaptation. Going into too aggressive of like loading strategies, right? So the reason I have either the wedge or I have the front foot elevation, it keeps the center of gravity back just a little bit, so it reduces the loading on that front leg. You see what I'm saying? So you don't go in the gym and squat 50% one day and then 100% the next. It doesn't work like that, right? You start and you build up. So when it's front foot elevated, it allows you to change levels very easily. It allows you to find that heel contact. And then over time, then you can go from a front foot elevated position to a position where you're on the floor. Now that's going to increase loading on that front leg. Maybe then you go from both feet on the floor to a rear foot elevated.
Gotcha. Because
all those allow you to increase the load on the front leg and increase that ability to get the knee over the toe.
So we would still in this scenario as a, I don't even like calling it a regression, but let's say I'm here. I'm still going to be working on getting my hip alignment. And getting that knee over toe, right? So I'm going to be level. And now I can still feel that heel. Right? Because I'm pulling back here. Push that knee forward. And I mean, I can, just from this position, I can tell you, I feel less stress on my muscles. Right? And then I'm going to drive back. And from there, we would progress it. And we would progress it by obviously going
now let's come down to the ground.
Down to the ground.
Still heel heavy. Let that knee go over the toe. But it starts with the heel heaviness, right?
So that's a big, big, big thing, because you will see this a lot, right? As soon as somebody does this, you'll see this heel kind of peeling off the ground.
Okay, and almost invariably, not all the time, but almost invariably, somebody's going to say, I feel a lot of pressure here.
In my patella tendon.
Right.
Okay, so another thing that I wanted to ask is like, so with this then, is it a progression or is it a regression if we lift the wedge up? Because I can get more range of motion if I'm here, if I'm loading it. I mean, I can, even for myself, I can certainly go way further. So I'm still feeling my heel here. Right? And so just, I'm getting more stretch here in that VMO. Can it be both?
In what sense?
Because if I elevate the wedge, I can feel my heel, and I can load that. But for me, I can also get more range of motion. So can it be a regression for somebody that's a beginner?
I think absolutely. So the second you use the heel wedge, it helps you stay back, right? It helps you keep everything stacked a little bit more. We know when we go from, say, a front heel elevated or a front foot elevated into a rear foot elevated, it changes our torso position, right? So now all of a sudden, I'm more here versus more tall and upright. So for most people to start getting the feeling, get the sensation, keep the heel contacts, I'm going to go with one of these two options.
And that's when, too, like this is where the different wedge heights come into play, because you can start from 25 degrees to 15, 10, and so on.
Because there's some people, literally a 10-degree wedge isn't enough, right? They need a 15 or 20 to get the heel contact, to keep their center of gravity back, because those are the people, they just live on a ski slope. Everything's pushed forward. They need that feedback from the wedge or from the box to keep their center of gravity back so that they can change levels more effectively.
And then when it goes to like other exercises, for example, so if we're going to squats from this position, same rules apply when it comes to the knees over toe scenario, right? Because there are people that will go, hey, as soon as I go here, it hurts. But those people also don't have good positions.
Yeah.
And that's probably why their knees hurt.
Or sometimes too, you know, we always talk about like foot, knee, hip alignment. Right? Very important regardless of activity. Core and pelvic position, very important. A lot of times what you'll see is sometimes when they go from this activity where you're very coached and nuanced on line everything up, a lot of times people still to this day think, oh, when I squat, I got to shove my knees out, right? So yeah, if I do this and I shove my knees out super hard and then try and drive them over my toe, man, VL, all these muscles are still like, come on, trying to turn your body down. Because at the end of the day, you might have to shove your knees out to create a space and sit down. But at some point, you got to be able to push up, right? So if you're trying to push up from this position, it's not going to go well. It's not going to feel good.
And that's, so the lesson is that sometimes you're going to be looking at the knees, but you really have to be looking at your hips, right? You have to look at that alignment that determines whether now you can go knees past toes and do it in a progressive manner, just like you would anything else, right?
Absolutely.
You wouldn't go, I'd say good deadlift is a good example, right? I can deadlift fine off the floor. Now I'm going to go on a 10-inch block.
Not ideal.
That's not ideal and too much. So again, before you start incorporating that, it's not that whether it's good or bad, it's whether are you ready to do it, and then how much of it should you do. Progress it slowly, make sure you're checking your hips, use the progressions, like I said, first front foot elevated, maybe a restricted range of motion, then going to the floor, then you could possibly go elevate with a further range of motion, even elevating your back leg, things of that nature, to get more of that knees over toes and strengthen. But again, don't just jump ship and go straight into it.